We at Heritage understand that Congress needs to get our country on a sustainable path, but it can only do it while also taking care of that primary constitutional role that we face to address our national security. And to do this, we need to be able to articulate the case for national security in a better way than we've ever done it before. And this index is going to be an absolutely critical tool for all of us in talking to members of Congress about these issues, talking to grassroots conservatives about these issues, by starting with vital national interests, going only then to the threats that our country faces today, our threats that our country faces in the future, going only then to capabilities, and from there talking about the difficult policy trade-offs that members of Congress need to address. This index, as Dakota mentioned, is an important part of a family of indexes that the Heritage Foundation is putting out. Our Index of Economic Freedom, which existed for decades, a new Index of Culture and Opportunity, and of course this Index of Military Strength. And it shows a belief that we have at the Heritage Foundation that you can only be strong at each by being strong at all three. And that strength as a nation requires strength on all three legs of that conservative stool: economic freedom, culture and opportunity, and military strength. Congressman Randy Forbes is the perfect person to talk about this theme, but all three of those themes. As founder of the Congressional China Caucus, he knows that to apply a principled stand on the value of human life, we have to take a strong stand against Chinese human rights violations. He knows that to protect the American private sector investment at home, we must take a strong international stand against intellectual property theft abroad. And he knows that to have a free, prosperous, and secure America, we need to have a strong national defense. Congressman Forbes is the chairman of the House Armed Services, Sea Power, and Projection Forces Subcommittee. His Virginia district includes the Hampton Roads Naval Facilities as well as Fort Lee. He's the recipient of the Army's Distinguished Civilian Service Award and the Navy's Distinguished Public Service Award, both the highest civilian honors each service provides. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Congressman Randy Forbes.
Mike, thank you so much for all you do, and thank you for allowing me to be here today. Dakota, thank you for this great work. We haven't gone through it all, but we will. We're nerdy. We love to read and get into the details, and your presentation is going to be excellent for policymakers to be able to do just that. One of the things I want to do, though, is take you out of the details for just a few moments. And I'll tell you, first of all, let me apologize as I come in this morning. I am at that point in time in my life where I don't have many filters left when it comes to national defense. I can't be too politically correct. And so if I say anything that may offend anybody here today, I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about somebody that looks like you and may act like you. So let me apologize at the outset for doing that. The second thing, and the reason I want to get out of the details of it, is I was at a dinner a while back with my wife, and the CNO was there, and we were talking the whole evening. And as I left, she looked at me in the car and she said, "Do you guys ever talk in English?" And I realized that sometimes that when we're talking to policymakers and we're talking to the general public, we're not painting the right pictures for them. And so let me just start with a conclusion before I give you the basis of that conclusion, and it's simply this. I believe we're no longer dangerously close to a crisis when it comes to national defense planning. I believe we're in a crisis for national defense. And I want to paint this picture for you. I don't have a nice PowerPoint presentation. Dakota puts me to shame with that, so I'm going to pretend that I've got one, and if you would, this is just a pretend clicker here. And let me click you back to March of 1968. In March of 1968, I was a sophomore at Great Bridge High School, and I was getting ready to give a speech to run for junior class president. You know what my two big issues were? Everybody in that audience was worried about how long the boys' hair could be and whether or not they had to wear socks in their penny loafers. At that time, most people across the country, not me, they were listening to the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. And a guy named James Crew had just graduated from honors from the Air Force Academy. He got married. His family gave him a big celebration. William Cordero had just received notice, he was from California, that he was going to be the father of a new baby boy. Now, I would go on to win junior class president of Great Bridge High School. The Beatles would break up. Rolling Stones would make a boatload of money. But James Crew would never see his family again, never have another celebration. William Cordero would never hold his son because they were both killed in Vietnam. In fact, in March of 1968 alone, we lost 156 planes, 250 airmen, 1,200 soldiers. Altogether in that war, we lost 58,000 American lives, and we lost 3,200 aircraft, almost the equivalent of our Air Force today. Now, I want to take my magic clicker and click you to 1990. And in 1990, I'm being sworn in as a freshman delegate to the Virginia House of Delegates. And in that year, the fourth largest army in the world with some rather sophisticated air defenses would invade Kuwait. And the world would come to us the way they always do and ask us to push back on them, and we would respond the way we normally do, and we would push back. At that particular situation, the estimate for our casualties were pretty high. In fact, we deployed 35,000 body bags. At the end of that fight, we lost 23 planes, and we only used 147 body bags. We returned back 34,853 empty body bags. Now, there are a lot of reasons why, but one of the primary reasons was we were able to establish air dominance in Kuwait that we were never really able to establish in Vietnam. Now, there are a lot of reasons for that. Andy could tell you with a great deal of specificity what they were, but just three of them was we created stealth planes, we had guided munitions and the Tomahawk, we had a jointness capability that we hadn't had before, and on all three of those, there was a lot of pushback from the Pentagon to move in that direction. Now, let me take that magic clicker and click you to today and not give you all the details that you're going to find in this index to back this up. But let me give you the quotes from some of the people that are running that military today, and we'd have that same Air Force walk in here today if I sat down and they would say, we are dangerously close to no longer being able to guarantee that air dominance that we could guarantee in Kuwait. The second thing is, if you listen to the Army, they will give testimony that we can no longer guarantee. Dakota, you talked about 2 wars. They've testified they can't guarantee that we could win 1 war. And then if you listen to the Navy would tell you that if we get to 260 ships, we cease to be a superpower, we become a regional power. And you pointed out quite clearly that based on their shipbuilding plan, you know, all the build-out is in the last decades or so, and if you took their build-out that they had proposed and we had run with that, this year we'd be down to 274 ships. 11 of those, as Dakota pointed out to you, would have been cruisers that would have been docked or beached, that had their electronics off and their radar off, and they'd be demanded. It would take 18 months to get them back into service. So essentially, you're looking at 263 ships, 3 ships more than when we become a regional power. Now, how in the world did we get in that kind of situation? A lot of reasons for that too, but let me just tell you this one, and let me apologize to you again if I hurt anyone's feelings. It's just my conclusion. Liberal thought has always failed when it comes to national defense planning. It's not because they're bad people. It's not because they don't love their country or they're not patriotic. It's because they always focus on one primary element and component, and that's intent. They believe somehow or the other that they can determine the intent of foreign actors, that even perhaps just a tad more arrogantly, that they can forecast what that intent is, and then perhaps even a little worse, that they can influence that intent. Now, while intent is important, it's a component, it's not an incredibly significant component for this reason. Intent can change within 48 hours on almost any actor in the world. Now, the unfortunate thing is conservatives are failing today when it comes to national defense because they're not focusing on the problem. When my conservative friends talk about national defense today, let me tell you what I hear coming from them. They're focused on a $600 toilet seat at the Pentagon. They're focused on a bloated bureaucracy. They're floated on the fact we don't have enough accountability. They're focused on the fact we just don't want to spend those dollars on defense. And they're focused on the fact that we may spend too much on one platform versus another platform, all of which are valid problems. They're just not the problem. And here is the problem, as I see it, with where we are in national defense today. Any good national defense planning comes down to 3 things: strategy, capacity, and capability. And if you look at the world today, the people who may want to do us harm today or in the near future, the curve lines for them when it comes to strategy, capacity, and capability are going up geometrically. And when you look at us, our curve lines when it comes to strategy, capacity, and capability are going down geometrically. And we have got to change those curve lines. Now, here is what's going to happen if we don't change the curve lines. Forget all the indexes. They're important. Forget all of even the statements from these generals. We had testimony before our committee just a couple of weeks ago. You cut it to the raw bottom, and here's where it is. If we don't change those curve lines, we will lose wars that we don't have to lose. We will have soldiers that die that don't have to die. But the third thing is, we could impact our quality of life in such a manner as to really put in jeopardy the very structure of the democracy that we all believe is so important. And let me tell you why. Poor countries, by and large, don't opt for democracies. It's normally countries on the uptick and that are doing well that do. And let me just tell you just a couple of the economics. I was before some of my friends, policymakers, just like you're trying to persuade Dakota the other day. And I asked them, I said, look, we've got 9 choke points around the world. You pick which one we don't want to give up. Is it the Strait of Hormuz? Because if we do, that's 35% of the oil in the world. CIA tells us that if we lose it for 2 weeks, gas prices will go up to $7.50 a gallon. Want us to give up the Asia-Pacific area because if we do, 2/3 of all the trade in the world is going through there for the next decade. Or maybe you want us to give up the underwater cabling that's coming across our oceans because today in New York City and around the world, 97% of all the international financial transactions that are taking place aren't coming by satellite. They're coming by underwater cable. The only Navy in the world that's defending and protecting that is the United States Navy. Or maybe you want to give up 85% of all the goods that are coming across our oceans. That's the kind of thing that is also at stake. Now, let me tell you what will not happen if we turn these curve lines around. There's this myth out there that somehow or the other, if we don't turn the curve lines around, we'll be in less conflicts. Well, everybody in here that has studied history knows that's not true. But perhaps the best example is sitting right down the road from us in the White House today. Whether you like President Obama or you don't like President Obama, I think one thing we all agree on in here is that President Obama would do anything he could to get out of the Middle East, including sometime to our own detriment, and yet he's about ready to launch the 3rd military effort in the Middle East. The conflicts will come. The question is whether we have the strategy, the capacity, and the capability to deal with them. The second thing that won't happen is you won't be able to buy it back. If you look, we have had $780 billion of cuts to national defense in the last 6 years. That's before sequestration. And if you were to write a check today and I could present it to the Pentagon, I can't buy back what we've lost for that $780 billion. And the third thing is defense won't be cheaper. Everybody thinks, well, I can cut defense. You know, because in this town the last 6 or 7 years, the question everybody's asking is, what do I want to spend on defense? They're not asking, what does it take to defend the country? And the problem with that is, if you don't spend the money when you need to, weapon systems get more expensive, everything costs more. It is more expensive, not less expensive to do that. So what do we need to do to turn these curve lines around? Well, the first thing we've got to do is we've got to begin to articulate the problem and laser in on the problem and get a solution to the problem and not run with all the red herrings that might take us in other directions because it's going to take all of our energy to do it. Second thing that we've just got to do is turn around sequestration. We can't get there from here with sequestration looming over us on national defense. We've got to get rid of sequestration if we're going to turn these curve lines around. And the third thing is, even after we get rid of sequestration, we've got to get the right numbers. Now, I don't know what the right numbers are. I'll just tell you right today because nobody does. I mean, I look and I hear people talking about the Gates budget, and look, I would like to have the Gates budget. It's just people disagree. People in this room disagree on what the Gates budget numbers are. You know, so we don't always know that, but let's say it's somewhere around $610 billion. President, it's like $534 billion. BCA caps are $499. Somewhere between that president's budget and the Gates number is where we need to be, and I think closer to the Gates number than the president's budget if we want to begin to turn these curve lines around. And then let me tell you the final thing that's incredibly important. And Andy, you know, we've talked about this at the hearing the other day that you were so gracious to be there for us. We've gotten away from strategic thinking in our country. And I don't care what we have with capacity and capability, if we don't have the right strategies, it's not going to work. And we have got to come back as a Congress and as a people and begin to once again think strategically if we're going to be able to do what we need to do for national defense. We simply can't buy our way out of this. And the best answer, and I know all of you have remembered it from your history, but I think about President Eisenhower, you know, when he comes into office, because that'd be my final click to you today. If I could click you back to 1953, when he's sworn in, I'm celebrating my first birthday. And he's being sworn in, but this is what he's looking at. He's looking at an economic downturn in the United States. He's looking at the fact that the Russians had done 4 nuclear tests. The Chinese China's turned communism at that particular point in time. He's looking at the fact that the Russians had 175 divisions and 125 in reserve, and he had 29. And the Truman administration is saying, we need more money. We need more money for defense. And what did Eisenhower do? He created, as you all remember, Project Solarium, but he looked not for his friends at the Pentagon, guys he'd served with, but he looked at the private sector. And he actually set up 3 groups to compete with each other and actually make presentations. And then, you know, he created the New Look, which ultimately saved $7 billion. But it held the Russians off for a decade. I have people all the time that ask me, well, what do you want to do, create in Congress a new Department of Defense? And I quickly come back, I said, no, we don't want a new Department of Defense. We want a Department of Ideas. We want to be able to have the best thoughts, the best minds competing against each other, so that we have the right strategies to go with the capacity and capability to defend and protect the United States of America. And let me just close with this. If we're able to turn those curve lines around, then I don't think we're going to hear music playing like they do in the movies. I don't think we're going to probably see headlines, because it's going to be a slow turn in how we fight to do it. But let me tell you what I think the end product will be. You and I will know that we have succeeded in doing what generations of Americans before us have done, and that is to defend and protect the greatest nation the world has ever known. Not a bad day's work, not a bad career opportunity if we can get it. So let me encourage you to stay in that fight to turn these curve lines around. Dakota, thank you for what you're doing to do that. Thank you all for letting me be here with you today.